The books of 2nd and 3rd John may be light reads, but they pack a heavy punch. Within the 13 verses of 2nd John and the 14 verses of 3rd John, the apostle warns his readers against having anything to do with false teachers while reminding them to continue loving one another. The common phrase between both letters is walking in truth, and that charge alone needs to be the anthem that we as believers today choose. So as we look into the Word together, let us yearn to become more like our Savior.
So let's get right to work here. I'm going to go back into last Thursday's message only because I find it valuable to take a theme from last Thursday, if you recall, and if you weren't here, I'll do my due diligence to bring it up to speed. The theme was being faithful over successful. Of course, as the world defines success, often in the metrics of numbers. How much money you have, success. How many people work for you, success. They often use numbers as the litmus test of success. But the Bible, and of course, the way Jesus lived his life and instructed us into the truth, it was paradoxical. He flipped the idea of success on its head. We'll discover tonight that success in God's economy is service. Greatness is service, looking out for others before you look out for yourself. So we talked about the parable of the talent, the parable of the mina. Jesus tells these parables using financial terms, important because he left different amounts in the parable of the talents with servants. And he says, I want you to steward what I'm leaving you. It's the word manage. It's not yours, but I'm entrusting it to you. And he leaves one with 1 talent, the other with 2 talents, and the third 5 talents. Right away, we make a spiritual understanding of what that means. Every one of us in this room has different amounts of talents, and that's okay. But what happens is, the person with the 1, he doesn't necessarily waste it, but the parable says he doesn't use it. He buries it in his backyard, so when the master returns, he goes, oh, here it is, I give it back to you. And that's the servant that Jesus rebukes. But the other 2, one who had 5 turned it into 10, and the one who had 2 turned it into 4. This was the response. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little bit. I will make you ruler over a lot of it. See, the understanding that each of us have different talents and of course different treasures. When I say treasure, different material possessions. God has entrusted each of us with different amounts of talents and treasure. And what we do with them, as we're faithful with them, it matters. It matters in God's economy, it matters now temporarily, and it matters for eternity. Then there's this parable of the minas. And the minas is, he calls 10 servants and he gives each of the servants the same amount. So I asked last Thursday, rhetorically, what is it that each of us have in the same amount? What do we all have that we share equally with? Maybe salvation if you're a believer, of course, but we find out at the end of the parable, the one who did not use his 1, he lost it. And you can't lose salvation according to God's word. I'm convinced that what we all have equal amounts of is time. Now you might say, that's not true. We don't all live the same amount of time. No. Every second, every minute, every hour, every day weighs the same. And what you do with your day differs from what I do with my day. But if we're living our day and our time with wherever God has placed us, with whatever he has given us, and we're using it for God's glory, and we're redeeming the time, because when I gave my life to Christ, my time went from BC, before Christ, which was counting down on my way to hell, and I entered into AD, the year of my Lord, and my time is now counting up on my way to heaven. The point from last Thursday, using Gaius's life and his testimony of hospitality, which means lover of strangers, is that those who are faithful in small things will be faithful in all things, right? Because if you're faithful, you're not cutting corners. You're faithful in private when nobody's watching. You're a faithful steward of what God has entrusted to you any given day, any given week, any given month. When you're faithful with small things, God sees your maturity and goes, I can give that person additional responsibility. But God is so good, he'll never give you more than your maturity can handle because it'll crush you. Which leads me to the fourth T. Nobody likes the fourth T. Not time, not talent, not treasure. It's trouble. God has entrusted us with trouble. And ultimately, that's what separates us from the world. It's easy to be prosperous. But who are you when you're going through adversity? Because that's what the world takes notice of. How you handle trouble. How I handle trouble matters to God. I could choose to complain and get bitter and resentful, or I could choose to navigate it. I call it suffering successfully. To God be the glory. And that's what the non-believing world sees and goes, how are they going through what they're going through, yet doing so with peace and joy? And it becomes a testimony. And I've experienced when people see you suffering successfully, it becomes an opportunity for you to introduce them to the one who you're trusting in as you're going through trouble. Let's continue the thread, verse 9, with Gaius in mind as the individual that John, he praises, he affirms. Gaius was one of hospitality, opened up his home to traveling teachers, speakers, itinerant missionaries. Gaius says, whatever's mine is yours. That's the word hospitality. I love strangers. That's the church. We're supposed to be a hospital for those who are sick spiritually. It's here where we introduce them to the physician. I'm not the physician, y'all. I just spent a lot of time in the hospital understanding the corridors, and I'm just a really humbled patient. And the more I spend time around the doctor, the more I'm confident to introduce anybody that walks through these doors to the one who took my sin-sick soul and gave me salvation. That's Gaius. Would to God that we'd be a church filled with Gaiuses who are opening our arms to the brothers and sisters of Christ. Now let me introduce you to Diotrephes. Diotrephes is who John is going to rebuke here. He writes in verse 9, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Now, remember, Gaius received not only John's spiritual authority as an apostle, as an elder, as a disciple who walked with Christ, and he's saying in the midst of this letter to Gaius, hey, there's one amongst you who is not receiving us. And not only that, he loves the preeminence among the church. Let's look at this one word, preeminence. It means chief place. He sought the chief place. He loved the attention. It means prominence of superiority. It means excellence. Your excellence? You're saying they are the preeminent. It means fond to be first. Look at me in a negative way. Diotrephes made it about himself. He took authority over the fellowship and would not heed the Apostle John's advisements. Now, in case you're wondering, what's the harm in preeminence? There's nothing wrong with being preeminent when other people are putting that on you. The problem is, it says he loves that position. Many believe there was a spirit of competition in Diotrephes. He was jealous, perhaps, of these other apostles and disciples who had authority amongst the church body. Now, in case we skip over the danger here, let me introduce you to what is called the original sin of Satan, who was known as Lucifer. You know where you can read about Lucifer? You ever wondered what was his sin? What made God kick him out of the heaven abode? It's in Isaiah chapter 14. I want to read it because listen to the language of Lucifer's fall. Isaiah chapter 14, I'll begin in verses 12 to 15. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. how you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will, ready? Exalt my throne above the stars of God. This is Lucifer. He wanted to exalt himself above God. I will sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. This is what led to the fall of Lucifer, who became known as the devil, Satan. Those two names mean the accuser, the slanderer. Jesus said the father of lies. Are we surprised that one of his tactics and strategies is to get us to think more highly about ourselves than we really are? Pride. And then Genesis chapter 3, we're reintroduced to the serpent under the influence of Satan, who was once Lucifer, who was once an angel, who's now a demon, is influencing negatively Adam and Eve. And he uses the same exact strategy. What led to his fall, pride, is exactly what he's going to present to Adam and Eve. Did God really say? So I stop and go, as a Christian, I need to know what God really said. It is the utmost priority of every believer to know what God said, because the enemy will come in and question, did God really say? And the moment you question what God really said, you are moving in pride, because you are independent of what God said. God said we can't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but of all the other trees we can. No. God didn't mean you would die if you ate the fruit. Now he's questioning. See, God knows that once you eat from that tree, your eyes will be open and you will know the difference between good and evil, and you'll be like God. This is what pride does. Pride has so many different degrees. Basically, it's when I am independent of God. I think more highly of myself than I ought. Pride is what led to the fall. Now, thank you, Jesus, how he divinely condescended, we say, who was in heaven, in the place of glory, who sat upon a throne. He decided to come down and enter into our mess in the midst of our fall and redeem us. This is what we call the gospel. It is the good news that follows the bad news. And the bad news is the wages of your sin equals death. We are all sinners in here, made from the same stuff. We all deserve death. Yet Jesus Christ, not based on anything you could give him in return or any good you'll ever do or even any bad you've already done, God demonstrates his own love in that while we are in sin, jacked up, messed up, Christ died for us. Church, receive that free gift of grace and recognize the moment you give your life over to Christ, you don't have to fake it anymore. You could be who God created you to be, open and vulnerable, naked, and allow the Word of God to do what the Word of God does. It does spiritual surgery. It takes your dead heart and pumps into your heart new life. And God becomes a father. And Jesus came and gave us what we didn't deserve. Now, I just said all that to say this, because Paul would write to the Colossians and give us an unbelievable biography about Jesus. Watch this, Colossians 1. This gets me energized. Verse 15 through 18. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He is the manifestation in the physical of the invisible God. He is the firstborn over all creation, which means he is the priority. He is the chief over all creation. In case many scholars believe that verse is saying he's a created being, verse 16 says, no, he's not a created being. For by him all things were created that are in heaven, on earth, visible, invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. That leaves nothing. Everything created through him and for him. Yes, according to the Proverbs, look at me, even the wicked for the day of doom. We don't like that version of the story, right? But everything. Jesus was God, creator God. The potter melted into his own clay. The painter put himself on the frame. Paul's not done. And he is before all things, and in him all things, ready, consist. The Greek tells us he holds all things together. When you give your life over to Christ, you are given him the authority to hold your life. And some of us are coming undone, unraveled, because we're taking our life back into our own hands. And in my sinful, fragile hands, I'm always gonna be frantic. I'm always gonna be anxious. I'm always gonna be worrying. And I gotta cast my cares upon the Lord because he cares for me. And in the midst of that casting, I find peace. And I place my life back in the hands of God because he holds me together. He holds me together spiritually. He holds me together emotionally. He holds me together physically. Medically speaking, laminin in our body, cell adhesion molecules under a microscope, they look like crosses, and they are the scaffolds that keep your physical body together. Remarkable, whether you want to call that Christian sensation or making something out of nothing, I don't care. I know this much, my God is holding my body together. And finally, we sit in verse 18. He is the head of the church, the body, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. That's the resurrection, that in all things he may have the preeminence. There's that word. That's the right application of the preeminence. Now let's get back to Diotrephes, who thinks he should have the preeminence. You understand the danger here? This guy's in Jesus' church and he wants all the attention. He wants to make it about himself. He is lording his authority over the people. And Jesus had something to say about that too. In Matthew chapter 20, of course, you got James and John, the sons of thunder, brothers, disciples. Their mommy comes to Jesus with them and says, I want my two sons to sit on your right and your left when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus is like, you have no idea what you're even asking for. Are they able to drink the cup that I'm gonna drink, be baptized with the baptism I'm gonna be baptized with? They say yes, and he goes, yeah, you're right. You have no idea what that cup entails though. It's the cup of suffering. It's the baptism of death. They would both go to their deathbed for the name of Jesus. Now, of course, the 10 disciples, they hear it. It tells us in the scriptures in Matthew chapter 20, they were greatly displeased. They were greatly disappointed that James and John and their mommy was asking for preeminence, high places. Jesus goes, come here, boys. I love how Jesus takes the opportunity to teach a valuable lesson. He says, you know how the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them? The rulers of the world, they base their authority on how high they climb up the ladder and how many people are beneath them. He goes, yeah, you understand that? They have great exercise of authority over others, yet it shall not be so among you. Okay, now Jesus has their attention. They understand how the world defines greatness. They got that in their mind. They understand the hierarchy, especially with the Roman Empire and the religious system. Jesus drives home the nail of truth. But whoever desires to become great among you, pause, because there's nothing wrong with the desiring to become great. There's nothing wrong with the desire to become great. However, I got to understand, how does God define greatness? You ready? Let him who wants to be great among you be your servant. Because in God's economy, greatness is service. Serving other people. I don't have time to think of my own needs while I'm serving you, and that's a good thing. I think people that are wrapped up in their own misery, their own self-sympathy, it's because they're not focusing on the body, focusing on serving somebody. Jesus continues, whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, your servant, let him be last. Then Jesus is like, okay, in case you think I'm lording this teaching over you, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, the preeminent one did not even come to be served. The holy God, this good God who came in human form, said, I didn't even come to be served. I mean, is that not a spiritual gut check in this place tonight? I say, who do I think I am at times? Christ said, I came to serve and laid down my life as a ransom for many. Paul would take that logic in Philippians chapter 2, and he would say, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, humility, let each esteem others better than themselves. And let us not just look out for our own interests, let us also look out for the interests of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Verse 5, who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. Translation, you can't steal what's yours. When Jesus was claiming to be God, he wasn't stealing something that was his. It says, but he made himself of no reputation. Translation is the doctrine of Kenosis. Theologically speaking, many Bible scholars believe it is the heaviest, deepest doctrine in the Bible. Why? Because it means when he made himself of no reputation, it means he emptied himself. Can I introduce you what he emptied himself of? He emptied himself of, and I'm going to explain this by way of addition, not subtraction. Even though it sounds like he gave something up, he didn't give anything up. By way of addition, he kept being God, but he added to his nature humanity. That's the doctrine of Kenosis, that God, fully God, became man, fully man. And what else did he do? He came in the appearance as a man. Being found as a man, he humbled himself. But he went deeper than humility. He humbled himself even to the point of death. And then deeper than that, even the death of the cross. You can't get deeper than that. Humbled himself, but obedient to death. But not just any death, the most degrading, painful, shameful, embarrassing, humiliating death devised by man, the crucifixion, hanging naked with nails through his wrists and his ankles, and he had to try to catch his breath every time he went down on the weight, and it was a slow, painful, agonizing death. That's what your God did for you. You know what gets me? Is that he could do that for me, and sometimes I could barely respond to his gospel. Just numb to it, because I heard it before. I heard this story, Pastor, and we leave church with our Bible underneath our arm, but never let the word go deep in our heart. That passage tells me that's why God highly exalted Jesus and gave him the name above every name. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow in heaven, on earth, under the earth, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. What's your point? The point is this: Jesus deserves all glory, yet he emptied himself. We deserve no glory, yet we're often full of ourselves. Mary decided to go see the priest. She sat down in the confession booth. The father said to her, Mary, what is your sins? She said, I'm not sure if it's a sin. I am looking for guidance. I'm curious, can you tell me if pride is a sin, if it's true? The priest said, what? She said, is it considered pride if it's actually true? He said, what do you mean by that? She goes, well, every time I come to this church and I look at all the other women, I recognize I'm so much prettier than everybody else. And I feel pride about it. I'm pleased to know that I'm prettier than everybody else at this church. I feel better than them, and then I feel guilty. And then I guess it's called pride, right? The priest said, well, yes. So you feel prideful about being prettier than everybody else? She goes, yes, but that's not the problem. The problem is it true? If it's true, is it still pride? The priest said, yeah, it is. And you need to confess. But let's confess right now, and we'll start with this. Mary, it's not just pride that you have to confess of. It's also a lie. And you see, pride not only makes us blind, but it lies to us. When we are prideful, we have an improper estimation about ourselves and our success. That's my definition of being proud. An improper estimation about who I am and about what I have. Proverbs 3:34 tells us God will scorn the scornful and give grace to the humble. That is the proverb that James and Peter would pull from as they're writing about pride and humility. And James chapter 4 verse 6 goes, God resists, right, the proud. It's more about God just giving that particular heart over to itself. God resists the person that is puffed up. But he gives grace, which is giving himself over to the humble. Peter writes something very similar. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Both James and Peter, they say, humble yourself, one under the hand of God, one before God, and God lifts you up. God will exalt you. Both passages, James chapter 4 and 1 Peter chapter 5, both introduce you to a lion who is seeking whom he may devour. Back to Lucifer. John in his first epistle tells us that the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, that's not of God. That is not of the Father. That is of the world. Those are the three strategies that the enemy will constantly recycle to get you and I to see something and want it with our eyes, take it and try it with our flesh, and of course, feel like we've made it. We are somebody. And God says, no, I work through the humble. I work through not those who have great ability. I'm looking for a heart of availability. And a heart of availability is an individual who submits and surrenders and places themselves before God, and they allow God to elevate. They allow God to lift up. See, the opposite of pride is humility, and humility can be defined as insight into my own insignificance in light of God's magnificence. Don't forget that part. I have an acute insight into my own insignificance. I am here for a brief moment, and then I'm gone. That's what the Bible says. Your life is brief. Insight into my own insignificance in light of God's magnificence, right? Because pride will always look down on others. Humility, however, looks out for others. Right? Look at the contrast there. Remember, we are looking at Gaius from the previous passages, and we're comparing him to this guy named Diotrephes. But that's not all Diotrephes is doing. He's not just claiming preeminence among the church. He's not just disqualifying the apostles' authority. In verse 10, watch this. John's like, hey, remember when Jesus called me and my brother James sons of thunder? He goes, therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does, prating against us with malicious words. John's like, I know there's a reputation out there right now. I'm the apostle of love, but don't get it twisted. In the midst of love comes admonishment. And because I love the church so much, I'm willing to come and correct a few people if I have to, because I love you. And he's like, if I come, I will bring to his attention in front of the church how he shouldn't be claiming preeminence. And oh yeah, by the way, stop running your mouth. Translation mine. John puts it a little bit more eloquently, prating against us with malicious words. You know what that means? Talking idly, making empty charges, talking nonsense, indulging in empty or useless chatter. In a word, gossip. Coming to somebody's mailbox right now. John said, I'm going to bring it to his attention, his gossip. Now, let us be clear. There are over 100 verses in the Bible that deal with slander, gossip, backbiting, tale-bearing. God takes this particular sin seriously. So while we look at other egregious, public, outward sins, they're easy to call out, right? And that's easy for, little Christian Christy sitting in the comfortable pew who knows that she's not doing those bad things like adultery and, oh, that's the pastor that killed somebody drinking and driving. God forbid, I would never do that. Meanwhile, little chatty Kathy here in the front row loves to talk about other people behind their back. We're talking about the same type of damage. Sin is sin is sin. Exodus 23, verse 1, do not circulate a false report. Now let's throw that at the godless media right now. Of course, gone are the days of objective, integrity-filled reporting on any given situation. You can't trust any side. Circulating false report, but we're just as guilty when we push that one button on Facebook that says share and we share misinformation. Am I talking to anybody tonight? Be very cautious before you push share, lest you circulate a false report. Leviticus 19:16, you shall not go about as a talebearer. Well, this is all leading to a few ounce instrument that can cause damage or it can bring life. You know what that instrument is? Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue. It's what I'm using tonight, my tongue, to communicate life. And those who eat its fruit will love it. In other words, you're gonna eat your words. What do your words taste like? What type of words are you speaking? Are you speaking words of life or death? Proverbs 21:23, every husband in this place, take note, because I'm preaching to myself. Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles. I can't think of too many things in my life. Let me say it like this. I often do not regret the things I didn't say, but I often can regret the things I have said. Be quick to what? Listen. Slow to anger. Slow to speak. Now, contrast, let's drive this home. Gaius was a hospital. Diotrephes, a gossip hall. To be known as a gossip hall where people can come, air out their concerns. I've heard prayer requests that sound sentimental or they sound sincere, but they're just gossip, airing somebody else's problems out. I've heard that. You know so-and-so's son? No, what? Tell me about it. Oh, they're back on drugs. Let's pray for them, okay? I mean, it's so subtle. And only God will know if the heart's motives were to do damage or it was sincere. But what I'm saying is let's check our own hearts, because here's what we do. It is impossible to convince somebody of the gospel when you have already convinced them of gossip. Gospel is good news. Gossip is often bad news. We are so quick to run and tell that, to gossip, to kick people's back in. I see people that I went to high school with, and no doubt, I do it to them, and I bet they do it to me. As soon as we leave the aisle after we talk about whatever's going on, you usually say, oh, so-and-so, they were the blank of the high school. She got around. Like, really? You just summed up somebody's entire life into a high school reputation? Really? This is your pastor saying, I'm going first. I'm guilty. I got to put my tongue in check. I got to put out the fire of hell that wants to ignite my tongue. I'm saying we need to heighten our sensitivity to gossip, and we need to lower our tolerance to it. Heighten our sensitivity, lower our tolerance. How do I do that, Pastor? Proverbs 26:20. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out. Your ears sometimes are the wood, the kindle. And somebody's tongue, which is set on fire by hell, is looking for an ear to tell. And if you don't allow your ear to engage their tongue, you put that fire out. Well, what about the person that gets done telling it? Well, you put it out by not repeating it. It stops with you. Where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. If that was all Diotrephes did, okay, he wants the preeminence, he loves it, he loves the attention, he makes it about himself. He's gossiping, he's not only putting down the apostle, he's talking maliciously about him. We don't know what he was saying. Verse 10 tells us, and not content with that, like if that was all he did, John's like, all right, I'd be able to deal with that. He also does this. He himself does not receive the brethren, okay, so he's selfish. He's not a hospital. He's a gossip hall. But he also forbids those who wish to as well, putting them out of the church. So not only is he not receiving the brethren, not only is he not opening his doors and his arms to the traveling speakers, that's what the church thrived on, traveling speakers. He's closing his arms and his doors, and he's also forbidding the people in his church, perhaps holding them hostage. Perhaps they became like him, because we often become like the people that we sit under. Jesus said, hey, guess what? Students become like their teachers. How we respond to life ultimately can be hinged upon what the pulpit is propagating, right? Where the pulpit goes, the pew goes. Pastor Matt and myself and any other minister that takes this platform, we would preach to ourselves before we came and preach to you, which means I am not trying to talk down to anyone when I preach. I'm trying to instruct spiritually, trying to get us all to champion the gospel and move forward together, lock arms. We want to eradicate the spirit of Diotrephes. Jesus himself said in John 13:20, most assuredly I say to you, he who receives whoever I send receives me. Like Jesus, like you receive somebody that I sent, it's as if you've received me. And he who receives me receives him who sent me. That's powerful. James 4:17 says, therefore to him who knows to do good and does not do it, it is sin. To know good and not do good, sin. See, Diotrephes knew the good that he should do, but he didn't do it. So to not do good yourself is selfish. To a degree, to withhold good could cause harm, but by and large, he makes a decision to not open his arms and be hospitable. That's selfish. Perhaps it only affects him. But what else did John say he did? Not only did he withhold good personally, he also forbade other people from doing good. Oh, that's not selfish, that's devilish. It's one thing for you to not do good. It's an entirely different thing for you to stop other people from doing good. This is why John in verse 11, he gives us a practical application here. Ready? Verse 11, beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He just took two lives, Gaius and Diotrephes, and he now gives us the application. Imitate Gaius, don't imitate Diotrephes. Imitate good, don't imitate evil. It is so easy in our present technological age to imitate evil. Social media speaking, what do you think retweet is? I've seen people or retweet somebody's quote, and it's just downright evil, downright oppressive, downright wrong, lies, slander, gossip, and retweet, shares, as I've already mentioned. But how about a show that was famous not too long ago, not even sure where they're at today. I'm sure there's another show that replaced the hype of this one show, but the youth were so concerned about keeping up with the Kardashians that they failed to keep up with Christ. Seeing a celebrity or an athlete who has no grounding in the truth and then replicating and trying to live like them? What? Like, imitating evil. Let me define the word imitate because it's fascinating. It's the Greek word mimetes. When you keep building out mimetes, you get the word mimic. Mimic can have a negative connotation, right? Don't mimic me. But positively speaking, when you mimic someone, what do they say? Flattery is what? It's the sincerest form of flattery is imitation, right? Now consider mimicking led to a certain profession, an entertaining profession. Mimetes, mimic, a mime. What does a mime do? A mime tells a story without saying a word. A mime will take something that's invisible, stuck inside of a box. I'm a good mime. A rope, right? They're taking something invisible and through their actions are making it look tangible. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Your life takes what's invisible, faith, and through your actions makes it look tangible. Your life imitates Jesus. The Spirit of God, invisible within us, but through your actions like a mime, you tell a story without saying a word. Christian, can you tell a story without saying a word? If you didn't open your mouth at your workplace, would anybody know there was something different about you? Are you smiling? I mean, I cannot talk enough about how simple a smile is. You wanna know why it's potent? It's potent because it's often absent. It's often absent, it's often missing. When you walk into a grocery store and you don't know what that clerk has been through, and you smile, good morning, how are you? God bless you. I mean, these are such simple ways, body language of telling a story. Recently, I'm doing push-ups by my bed, and of course, my daughter Willow, who's 17 months old, she sees daddy and she often wants to come like snuggle. She's like a little love bug these days. And I'm trying to do my push-ups. So every time I push up, she like kind of crawls underneath me. And I'm doing push-ups on this push-up machine thingy. It's got like handlebars. And as I'm doing that, I push up and she gets there. Now I can't do another set. So I'm like, come on, honey. I'm kind of getting mad at Sarah. Like, get her out of the way. I'm trying to get my workout in. So I finally just give up. I take my hands off the handlebars, and she's still there. What I didn't realize was she wasn't trying to cuddle up because she put her hands on the same handlebars, and she started doing these little push-ups like this. And it hit me that here my 17-month-old daughter was watching me. And she began imitating me. And there's a lesson right there for any parent in here, that our children are watching us. But more than that, as a little child, sincere and sensitive and so simple, seeing her father and wanting to resemble him and imitate him. And I take that idea and I go, I want to imitate my Father in heaven. And that's why Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus, chapter 5, verse 1, therefore be imitators of God as dear children. Walk in love, agape, self-sacrificial love. How do I do that? As Christ also loved us and gave himself for us, offering us a sacrifice to God, which is a sweet-smelling aroma. Now, in case you think this has to do with willpower, giving yourself over to the Lord, or imitating Jesus Christ, as Paul said, imitate me as I'm imitating Christ, that is not a matter of trying. It is a matter of dying. That's why Jesus said, you have a desire to come after me? I need you to do a few things first. I like the desire, but you need to deny self, die to self, because you have a fleshly appetite of pride. And you'll never be able to follow me unless your flesh is crucified. And then you take up your cross, which keeps your flesh pinned down so the Spirit of the Most High God can rise up, and then you can follow Jesus. And when you follow Jesus, you find the rut of the relationship to get closer to Jesus, because Peter said in chapter 2, verse 21 in 1 Peter, for to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow in his steps. Okay, back to suffering. Whether it's prosperity or adversity, the word that Peter chose to use here in Greek for example on how your life should follow Jesus' life, imitate, example, is hupogrammos. The imagery of the Greek language is phenomenal. When you study the Greek, you recognize when Peter wrote that, and he wrote hupogrammos, what came to mind to anybody that understand the language was a Greek writing tablet. That's what example was, a Greek writing tablet. And the writing tablet had grooves on it. And the grooves for a little Greek student was to learn the alphabet. And they would trace, almost like Braille, the letters going from, you ready? Alpha to Omega. That's why Jesus said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I want you to trace my life from Genesis to Revelation. I want you to put your life in my grooves and let me live through you. That is why there is no greater sermon than a godly example. I'll preach my lungs out every Thursday and any given Sunday. You better believe that, church. I am honored and humbled to do so, but there will never be a greater sermon than a godly example, because it's what you do outside of this building as sermons themselves, living your faith out before a dying world and a watching world. A man named Harry Walls, Division I college athlete, football, played alongside of Ron Brown. Ron Brown was significant on that team, Brown University. Ron Brown would eventually go on to be an Olympian for running. He would end up in the NFL. He's currently the director of student development or player development at the University of Nebraska. Ron Brown, based on the world, is a celebrity. Harry Walls got injured, didn't really play the final few years, struggled with whether he should stay on the team or leave, but he was a Christian, Harry. And Harry decided to live each day for God's glory. He lived under the radar. He didn't know anybody on the team was watching him. He had no significance on that team. Ron Brown did. 22 years later, Harry goes to seminary. Not 22 years later, he gets out of seminary, he enters ministry. This is 22 years later. He's got a career in ministry in California. He's at a ministry event, at a round table, and they're all sharing where they're from, who they are, and he says his name, and a guy at the table goes, your name sounds familiar. He goes, I don't know where from. So he starts to talk about where he's from, and he's like, I don't know. Your name is really familiar. Do you know Ron Brown? And he goes, well, it depends. You're talking about Ron Brown from Brown University, who's a coach? He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, I played football with him. He goes, I just got done reading his book. And there's a chapter in his book that's titled, Whatever Happened to Harry? See, Ron Brown was not a believer. And what Harry did not know, as he was low man on the totem pole, was that Ron, the star, was watching him. And Ron couldn't reconcile to himself what made Harry different. Something about Harry's life. Harry wasn't in the limelight. Harry was just doing the next right thing to glorify his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. 22 years later, Harry has no clue where Ron's at in life. A stranger tells him, I read Ron's book, and you're in one of the chapters. Whatever happened to Harry? Ron had no clue what happened to this young man who was the person responsible, unbeknownst, to lead him to Jesus. There is no greater sermon than a godly example. Imitate good. Verses 12 to 14, very quickly, we're introduced to a third character in this play. Of course, the first was Gaius. He's the one receiving the letter. John is writing to Gaius. He's applauding and commending Gaius' hospitality. He says he's walking in truth. That's the theme of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He is affirming his hospitality gift. He's also writing the letter to say, I'll be there to rebuke Diotrephes, because he's not a hospital, he's a gossip hall. And it's believed that he's sending the letter through Demetrius. And that is why he says Demetrius, Gaius, has a good testimony from all and from the truth itself. Because when you have a good testimony, the truth will affirm your life. God will find a way to affirm your life. The truth recognizes the truth. And we also bear witness, John says, and you know that our testimony is true. He's like, this is one big family of God. Verse 13 and 14, I love this. I had many things to write, but I do not wish to write to you with pen and ink. I hope to see you shortly, and we shall speak face to face. Peace to you, a common greeting. Our friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. That is the best definition of a church. How many people in this room tonight do you know by name? How many people in this fellowship have you gone out of your way to meet and greet by name? Think about that. John's like, that's what makes family family. You know each other. You recognize you're all jacked up and messed up. We all have the same sin, and we serve the same Son, Jesus. Let's wrap this up, close out the book of 3 John by saying this. Those who are faithful in small things will be faithful in all things. Let us be a people who are more about the gospel than gossip. Let us not slander, backbite. Let us be forthright. Let us not be filled with pride and look down. Let us humble ourselves and look out. It's impossible to convince somebody of the gospel when you've already convinced them of gossip. Sum it all up. Let us be content to be nothing as we make and seek out for Christ to be our everything. And since we're not dead, we're not done. We've heard it by God's grace. Let's do it. God bless.